This is Aaron Raw, and I'm a proud LGBT ally.
Coming to you on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright. I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts Daniel Wolfsong.
Hey, everyone.
And Jonathan Moore.
Hello.
This, my friends, is the Gaytheist Marriage Extravaganza. Today we're going to discuss the state of the move toward marriage equality in the United States, and we're going to talk about the case the United States Supreme Court will be hearing later this month. And finally, we're going to get personal, and the three of us are going to talk about what the idea of marriage equality means to us as people. Not as queer, trans, or atheist people necessarily, just people. Before we jump in, though, I have something I need to say. These episodes seem to start with a rant from me more often than not at this point, but that's okay. So I had sort of a transformative experience this past weekend that I want to relate. There's a band called White Collar Sideshow. Look them up on YouTube, you won't be sorry. Long story short, visually and musically, they're like the Blue Man Group meets the circus in a horror movie. And I'm not joking when I say that that is an honestly accurate description. A band I was in years ago, got to know them from playing music festivals and from spending a short time on tour with them. I'm going to throw this out there now, they're a Christian band, but stay with me here. I was an atheist all those years ago, and I'm an atheist now. I stand where I always have. But, religious differences aside, these folks are some of the best human beings I've ever met in my life. Their lives really and truly are about loving people and making people feel less alone in the things they struggle with. Their attitude is infectious. Don't get me wrong, I'm not about to convert or anything, but being in the presence of people that genuine, so real, so loving, it's an experience that can change somebody. It changed me all those years ago, and it changed me this past weekend. See, I showed up to the venue a little nervous about what they were going to think. They didn't know me as Callie. They knew me as this big, burly, bearded dude in a metal band. We're all Facebook friends, so they obviously knew about me, but I was anxious because I get anxious. It's just what I do. I worry. But I walked into the venue, saw their faces light up, and I saw them run to hug me, and they told me how amazing it was to see me, how happy they were for me, and how excited they were to be back in Ohio at a venue as nice as the one that I run sound at sometimes. They asked me questions about how my life has been in general and since coming out. The thing is, their show for me is not even necessarily about the God that they believe in. What they talk about mostly during the show is the idea of taking off your mask, letting people see you for who you really are, sharing your struggles and triumphs and happiness and heartache with others, because we all have those things, right? We get so caught up in the face we present to the world that we start to value that more than we value ourselves. We get invested in being the one who's put together and the one who's doing so well despite the odds, when the reality is that so often we're not that person. We may never actually have been that person. Hiding behind those things is toxic. Anyone who's had trouble coming out as gay, trans, bi, queer, atheist, or anyone who's ever had to have a tough conversation like those sorts of conversations can be, anyone can identify with that. Their show's about letting go of that, being real with each other, challenging our thinking, being honest about the things that we struggle with, and lifting each other up when we need it. Religious differences aside, that's something that anyone who calls themselves a humanist should be able to get behind. When we said goodbye on Sunday night, I got a huge hug from their drummer, Phil. He told me that he loved me, that he was so proud of me, and that he was so glad that I was his friend. And just being real, guys, that wrecked me. It wrecked me to the core. Maybe it was because of how tight he was hugging me. Maybe it was the way that he was talking. Maybe it's just because of how much I look up to them. But spending those 2 days with those guys changed something in me. I've always said that I want my life to be about loving people and showing compassion, but I've been bad at that in a lot of ways, and I've been guilty of not even trying. That changes now. I'm still as atheist as I ever was, but I'm also a humanist. And frankly, my identity as a humanist is more important to me than anything else about me. I want to put people first. I'm kind of losing my taste for tearing down religion and making fun of the stupid things that politicians say because it's easy. I mean, obviously, I think a less religious world is a better one, and I'm not going to shy away from those conversations when it's time to have them. And obviously, the things politicians say matters. Who gets elected matters, and we need to stay informed about that kind of thing. What I'm talking about here is the part that I want to play in this movement. There are satirists, comedians, intellectuals, and debaters way more skilled than me, and I want them to keep doing what they do. And I'm not saying I'm never going to join them from time to time, but my purpose, as I've chosen to make it, is to lift people up. To not just talk about compassion and love, but to do my best to live it in my everyday life. I say all this to say that you may notice some changes in me and in the show moving forward. I'm sort of done spending so much time mocking religion and mocking politicians. I want this show and I want my life to be about reaching out to lift people up and show them that they're not alone. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be exactly as you are. For some people, the act of drawing their next breath is an act of radical activism. For me, it's about putting my heart on display from behind a microphone or a phone camera or in a room full of people and letting them know that there's a community out there that loves them and cares for them and that they don't have to fight their fight alone. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with the Gaytheist Manifesto Marriage Extravaganza.
Yo, check out this chef, right? Right? That's so gay. That's really gay. Look at those pants.
Please don't say that.
What?
Don't say that something is gay when you mean that something is dumb or stupid. It's insulting. It's like if I thought this pepper shaker was stupid and I said, man, and this pepper shaker is so 16-year-old boy with a cheesy mustache. Just saying.
Here's an excerpt from Fear of Physics by Lawrence Krauss.
A physicist, an engineer, and a psychologist are called in as consultants to a dairy farm whose production has been below par. Each is given time to inspect the details of the operation before making a report. The first to be called is the engineer, who states,
"The size of the stalls for the cattle should be decreased. Efficiency could be improved if the cows were more closely packed, with a net allotment of 275 cubic feet per cow. Also, the diameter of the milking tubes should be increased by 4% to allow for a greater average flow rate during the milking periods."
The next report is the psychologist, who proposes the inside of the barn should be painted green. This is a more mellow color than brown and should help induce greater milk flow. Also, more trees should be planted in the fields to add diversity to the scenery for the cattle during grazing to reduce boredom. Finally, the physicist is called upon. He asks for a blackboard and then draws a circle. He begins.
"Assume the cow is a sphere."
This old joke, if not very funny, does illustrate how, at least metaphorically, physicists picture the world. The set of tools physicists have to describe nature is limited. Most of the modern theories you read about began life as simple models by physicists who didn't know how else to start to solve a problem. These simple little models are usually based on simpler little models, and so on, because the class of things that we do know how to solve exactly can be counted on the fingers of one, maybe two hands. For the most part, physicists follow the same guidelines that have helped keep Hollywood movie producers rich. If it works, exploit it. If it still works, copy it. I like the cow joke because it provides an allegory for thinking simply about the world, and it allows me to jump right into an idea that doesn't get written about too much, but that is essential for the everyday workings of science. Before doing anything else, abstract out all irrelevant details. There are two operatives here, abstract and irrelevant. Getting rid of irrelevant details is the first step in building any model of the world, and we do it subconsciously from the moment we are born. Doing it consciously is another matter. Overcoming the natural desire not to throw out unnecessary information is probably the hardest and most important part of learning physics. In addition, what may be irrelevant in a given situation is not universal, but depends in most cases on what interests you. This leads us to the second operative word, abstraction. Of all the abstract thinking required in physics, probably the most challenging lies in choosing how to approach a problem. The mere description of movement along a straight line, the first major development in modern physics, required enough abstraction that it largely eluded some pretty impressive intellects until Galileo.
Fear of Physics by Lawrence Krauss. Find this audiobook and many more at atheistaudiobooks.com. The facts you won't hear in church.
And welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. As I said in the intro, today we're going to be talking about marriage. And every time I hear that word, I think of marriage.
That's exactly
what
I
I'm
was
talking
I was
about?
talking about that very thing today.
Marriage. God, what a great movie. So in this part of the show, I want to discuss the case the United States Supreme Court will be hearing on April 28th. The case scheduled to be argued is it's actually a few different cases being heard at the same time because the issues in each case are the same. Issue 1. Does the 14th Amendment require a state to license a marriage between two people of the same sex? Issue 2. Does the 14th Amendment require a state to recognize a marriage between two people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state? Now, of course, this seems obvious to me. Apparently, the legal question isn't quite so clear, as the Supreme Court has, on a few occasions, had the opportunity to declare the legal right for gay couples to get married, but stopped short of doing that. I'm not a legal expert, and I'm going to be honest and tell you that sometimes I don't really care about the legalese. My guess is that the Supreme Court is supposed to, when possible, defer to the power of the states to make up their own laws on those kinds of things. And as we know, some have come along, albeit kicking and screaming, some haven't, and still others are in the midst of their own legal battles that haven't made it to the Supreme Court yet. So, guys, what do you make of the legal arguments? What are your understandings?
Well, here's the thing. The whole legal controversy surrounding marriage equality hinges on the idea of one man and one woman versus just one consenting adult and another consenting adult, regardless of gender and sex. And any reasonable person recognizes that there's nothing special or sacred about marriage being exclusive to heterosexual couples. The only people who seem to disagree with that are religious folks who consider marriage to be a religious institution. But here's the thing. People don't get married by the church. They get married by the state. So making marriage a religious issue defined by religious parameters is illegal and completely illogical. The real question here is whether or not confining marriage to one man and one woman exclusively discriminates against consenting adult couples who don't fit that description and who want the legal benefits and the cultural benefits of getting married. And it's pretty clear that it does discriminate.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's about equality. You know, the 14th Amendment that you brought up, that's the Equal Protection Clause, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So it's about, being equal. I've heard, the argument, well, gay people can just go marry a woman or a man.
Right.
But I don't think that's what it says at all.
Well, in some of the things that I've heard, like, so obviously there's the really asinine argument about procreation, right? Like, states have a legitimate interest in encouraging people to procreate. Gay couples can't do that, therefore gay marriage shouldn't be a thing. I think anybody who doesn't see the obvious flaws in that argument is probably not super interested in looking too deep into the issue, because, I mean, just being real, like, I'm a trans woman who's been on hormones for a year. I'm not going to have a child that's genetically mine ever. But because I'm legally recognized as female, if I fall in love with a guy and get married to a guy, no one's going to question the validity of our marriage legally anyways.
Right. And procreation isn't a prerequisite for marriage anyway.
Or at least it shouldn't be,
Right. I mean, what about straight people where someone's sterile or had like ovarian cancer and they had to have their ovaries removed? Are they not allowed to get married?
Or people who just don't want to have kids.
Don't want to have kids.
Yeah. Yeah, or people that can't have, don't want to or can't. Yeah, exactly.
And, some of the other things that I've heard are, things like, there's still a robust debate on the issue, so the court shouldn't step in. And that argument just seems very, very ignorant of the past.
Slavery,
to me.
Slavery was highly controversial when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued.
And even more recently, the Civil Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as recently as the 1960s, it was illegal for a black person and a white person to get married.
Right.
But that obviously changed. And in fact, I heard a statistic recently that more people are in favor of gay marriage now than were in favor of interracial marriage when that law was overturned. So.
Right. I remember you saying that before. And that's amazing to me. And obviously I don't want to pretend like, racism and homophobia and transphobia are the same thing. They're not. But I think the underlying questions surrounding the legality of this as a civil right, I think there's a lot of intersectionality there.
Yeah, there are definitely some very solid parallels.
So I guess when it comes down to it, I mean, let's read the text of the 14th Amendment here.
Okay. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but and actually, now that we say that, I think we did read the text of that on a previous episode.
We did.
Yeah.
So there's us pro radio people covering the same thing again. I mean, totally not even remembering that was a thing. So just playing devil's advocate here for a second. So the 14th Amendment doesn't actually say anything about marriage. So why not leave the definition of marriage to the states?
The 14th Amendment does specify that we get equal protection under the law on a state level as well. Mm-hmm. And equal protection under the law to me means that if my neighbor has the right to get married by the state, then I should have that right as well.
I couldn't agree more. And there are some stories that you hear that very, very brutally and sadly play this out. I mean, there was a story of a lesbian couple, a committed lesbian couple, had been together for decades, and one of them died before they were able to get legally married. Mm-hmm. And her partner was hit with like a $250,000 tax bill because they weren't married.
I remember that story.
So, and later in the show, we're going to talk about more the personal side of these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But, that's just as like, you can't necessarily completely separate the legal argument from the personal consequences that these things can have for other people.
May I? Yeah. I was just looking at some more stuff in this, article on the 14th Amendment, and there was a 1923 case called Meyer versus Nebraska, in which the court stated that liberty protected by the Due Process Clause, quote, without a doubt denotes not merely freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of an individual to contract, to engage in any of the common occupations of life, to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, establish a home, and bring up children to worship God, etc., etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So to marry is right in there. The court specifically interpreted it to involve marriage. So
anyone who has a problem with, let's say, gay marriage, two men marrying each other, or two women marrying each other, it's always based on either bigotry or bigotry based on their religious beliefs. There's never, ever an argument. I've heard no argument, an intelligent argument that says, well, it should only be a man and a woman because that wasn't based on some religious belief or some bigoted belief, neither of which have any place in a civil manner.
Right. I mean, I've heard some of these arguments, right? And, so many of these arguments don't even really, and it's just, the episode that we just did about non-discrimination laws. I mean, so many of these things, like, they don't even pretend to be respectable. I mean, these people wear it on their sleeves that I don't think this should be legal because God.
Yeah, and they'll say, well, the law does say one man and one woman. We're just following what the law says. But that's being dishonest. You're using that as a gotcha, because what you really feel about it is it's supposed to be one man and one woman because God, or because the Bible.
Because gay people are icky.
Right, exactly.
I know.
And,
Ew.
Except lesbians.
Yeah. Hot lesbians, mind you, hot lesbians.
Right. Of
yeah.
course.
Yes. That distinction is important. But yeah. So, but they use the law as this really obnoxious gotcha moment where it says, well, the law does say it's one man and one woman, and they repeat that over and over again. You hear that over and over. Don't pretend that this has anything to do with anything aside from your own bigotry.
Well, right. I mean, they're the ones to cry about the law until the law happens to be something they disagree with.
Like wanting to pay grazing fees, for instance.
Oh, you mean that one time when a bunch of white guys got away with pointing automatic rifles at cops?
Yeah, that kind.
That one thing that happened and no one died?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh boy. Yeah, that was a thing.
So yeah, I mean, if there isn't a reasonable or intelligent argument as to why one man and one woman can't be extended to any gender, how does it not qualify as equal protection?
Right. And, another thing that I think a lot of times gets forgotten in these conversations, like, I did an ally segment a while ago about, not forgetting trans people in the conversations, and how when we talk about issues of equality, so often marriage is the only thing we talk about. And obviously marriage is an important thing. I mean, I think it's important enough that we're doing an entire episode on it. But I think it's important to note that even for trans people, even for heterosexual identified trans people, same-sex marriage is an issue, because there are so many places where it's still sort of ambiguous what a person's legal status is when they're trans and when they transition.
Good point.
And and one thing that's interesting to me when I was doing research for this, I realized there are actually only 2 states in the country who don't have some sort of pro-equality ruling. Those states are Georgia, shock, and North Dakota. Every other state either has marriage equality. There are 37 states that have marriage equality, including the District of Columbia. And every other state has at least some sort of court ruling that has struck down its marriage ban or ruled it at least partially unconstitutional in some way. And and a lot of those cases are working their way through the courts. I think they're probably going to become moot come June.
Right.
Well,
but
yeah, activist judges, so.
Oh yeah, those activist judges in 37 states deciding the same thing. All of a sudden, it's a liberal revolution.
No.
And in Alabama.
Yeah, them liberal Bush-appointed judges.
Yeah, those bastions of liberal ideology, like Arizona and Oklahoma and New Mexico.
Don't forget
and
Iowa.
South Carolina and North Carolina and Iowa. All of those activist judges in those states,
it's strangely not
somehow circumvented God's plan.
It's strangely not Ohio. I don't understand.
Ohio doesn't necessarily surprise me. Our marriage ban has been in effect, if memory serves, since 2004.
Crikey.
And there's a group who I think is planning to try and get our marriage ban on the ballot in 2016. Again, hopefully we won't need it, but that's, and the last I read, there, at least according to polling, I think it's like 52 or 54% support for overturning the marriage ban. I think, straying slightly more into the personal side of things, I think it's pretty amazing how fast these things have changed. I mean, I'm not one to, beat the drum of, oh my gosh, look how far we've come, look how amazing and awesome things are, because there's obviously a very long way that we have to go, and we were starting from such a low point to begin with. It's almost insulting to celebrate. Oh, we finally have the right to marry. Like, that's something to celebrate, as opposed to just being pissed off that we didn't have it in the first place.
Yeah, that's like that's like the people that are, well, we have a black president, so racism is over.
Exactly. It's the same attitude. But if you look at the polling on why this has changed, I mean, like I said, in Ohio, we voted a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage in 2004. This is 11 years ago, and that's not long in political
North
time.
Carolina did it just a couple of years ago, 2012.
Right. And now it's legal.
And now it's legal
for gay people to get married in North Carolina. I think what's important to recognize when you look at the polling on the issue about why attitudes have changed so rapidly and so completely, the response is always because I found out someone I loved or someone I cared about was gay, or that I got to know someone who was gay. And, that's somewhat encouraging and somewhat maddening at the same time. I don't think that you should have to be close to someone to recognize that they deserve the same rights that you do. Mm-hmm. But I guess it at least points to some sense of humanity and empathy that some people have left. That once something becomes personal, it's a hard thing for me, because someone who campaigned so hard against Rob Portman, for example, politician from Ohio, staunchly against gay marriage until he found out he had a gay kid. And now he's a pro-equality Republican. So the struggle I have with myself is, do we welcome him into the fold? Pretend like nothing happened? Or, and maybe that's a false dichotomy. Maybe it doesn't have to be the two extremes. Maybe it's, well, let's see how much of an ally you really are, and we'll welcome you once you've proven that you really are one. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that this speaks to a very powerful cultural indoctrination that we're struggling against with our movements, and that for so long, for so many years, and well into our lifetimes, being gay, being trans, these were things that have been reviled culturally, seen as cultural anomalies, as perverse, and that's something that we still struggle against. A lot of folks will say, I'm okay with gay people as long as I don't have to see them holding hands or kissing, because that's kind of gross. We're fighting against this mainstream cultural perception that two men together or two women together, or the whole concept of a trans person, it resonates on this very visceral, sort of primal level in people, and they have this knee-jerk kind of response to it, because that's how we've been portrayed for so long, as being these perverse anomalies, sexually perverse, that we men who want to be women who want to be men together when they should be with women, and as evolved as we've become, I'm speaking on the level of us as a whole, there's still a lot of that mentality just deeply entrenched in us as a culture, and that's why this persists, and that's why I think people, before they know someone who's a gay person or a trans person, they're just going along with the cultural flow of it. They never think twice about it. That's why so that pre-programmed response is all they really know until they're forced to question it by way of a family member or a friend.
Right. And I think that's where, obviously we're talking about marriage equality in this episode, so it's LGBT heavy, but I think that's where the aspect of atheism comes into it and humanism, because, when I first started trying to become, an active part of the atheist community, meeting and getting to know so many atheist podcasters, so many people in the atheist movement who are really trying to make a difference. And I don't mean just the people who, who want to tear down religion and, yell down at religious people and make themselves feel superior because they won an argument. I'm talking about people who have a real heart and a real passion for making the world a better place. Those folks, the people that we're friends with on Facebook, the people that we hear from constantly, the people who, like, as soon as there's LGBT related news, they're tagging us on Facebook. What do you think?
Yeah.
Those people come to us with an open mind and they say, hey, I recognize that I'm ignorant about this. I want to learn. Teach me. What do you go through? What are your experiences like? What does this mean? And I think a lot of times we get lost in the intellectual side of things.
Yes.
And I don't mean to downplay intellectual pursuits. Obviously, I enjoy debate. I consider myself to be an intellectual. I want to have high-level, highbrow conversations. I want to debate philosophy and all of that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, for me, what it's really about is what makes it better for people.
Yes.
For sure.
And the thing that I can say for this community, at least the atheist community, at least as far as I've experienced it, I've experienced no pushback from the atheist community.
Nor have I.
Nope.
I talked to Matt Dillahunty and Seth Andrews and Aaron Ra about trans issues. These are people who very often talk about gay issues.
Yes.
And I said, hey, what about trans people? And they engaged immediately. They didn't push back. They didn't start with skeptical attitudes. They didn't question. They said, yeah, that's messed up too. And I think that's the value of recognizing the intersection between the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. Not trying to, do some cheesy call out to the intro of the show, but I think that's why it's really important, because I think once you've really gotten rid of that mindset and you've recognized, like, look, I don't have all the answers, I think it's so much easier to look at another person and say, you know what? I don't know what you've been through. I don't know what you face in life. But you know what? I care. I want to know. I want to make it better, and I want to learn.
I think you're really right, Kelly, and it makes me sad that there are judgmental people out there, but it makes me happy that there are so many, open-minded, considerate, thoughtful people, and it interests me that, that there's so many of them to be found in the atheist movement as opposed to, more conservative religious people. I don't know. I've been a Christian in a previous part of my life, and the Bible, especially the New Testament, is all about not judging people. That's what Jesus talks about all the time. Judge not lest ye be judged.
Well,
I know.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I think a big part of it is when you begin to look at other groups as actual people, rather than as just ideas or differences, and that's how people become allies. That's how there are all kinds of allies. It's when and this is kind of dovetailing with what you were saying, Jonathan. When others begin looking at us as people, individual people who matter and who have a place in society and in the world, and that's and when we take that view towards other people, and communities that we don't particularly belong to, that's the key. Because when you're just seeing a group, oh, this group wants this, or this group says this, and I don't agree with it.
Yeah. I
There's
agree.
this wall. Yeah. There's this wall, and so that's what I think. That's what I think. Being an ally is really about, is when you're actually seeing folks as folks.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard, especially when they're it's hard to be the person who, it's hard to be the better person when
taking the high road when you just want to punch them in the face.
when they're the ones, when they're needling at you, and
sure,
you just want to shut them down, but sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to be better.
Well, see, that's an interesting point, because that's something that we all sort of deal with in our own respective human development. Is our response is on us. What someone else does, that's on them. The way we respond is on us. And what we hear a lot is, well, he made me, this person made me respond this way, or, this person's making me crazy, and I can't be held responsible for my actions when they do this and that. Yes, you can. And you should. We have to hit a place where we let these challenges and these struggles give us a chance to evolve and grow. And
well, I'm gonna slightly disagree with you there. I think I agree that personal responsibility is a thing when we're talking about how we react in these situations. Mm-hmm. But, kind of like I was saying before in the story that I told a few episodes ago, about this whole idea that, nobody can hurt you without your permission, or, that whole idea. It's sort of a battle between those issues, right? Because for me, I don't want to be that reactionary. Mm-hmm. That when somebody says something stupid, I'm immediately in F you, you're stupid, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, blah, blah, blah. There are some times where I have reactions like that I honestly can't control. But is that something that I can work on?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of what my whole little rant at the beginning of the show was about in the first place, is trying to be that person. Because okay, so, I'm a humanist. I'm also a skeptic, right? Being a skeptic means that evidence matters, and that I want to know what actually works. I want to do what actually works. And all of the data says that equality matters to more people when you get to know someone. Mm-hmm. And so, kind of, again, sliding into the personal side of things, if we want legal equality, I mean, we can fight, and we can fight hard. And I'm not saying don't do that. If someone is trying to hold me down, you bet I'm going to fight back. But you can do that in a way that shows someone your heart. I'm a human being. I'm not just gay. I'm not just bi. I'm not just trans. I have a favorite band. I have a favorite TV show. I want to spend time with my friends. I want to help people out when they're sad. Mm-hmm. All these kinds of things. And I think showing people that is one of the best things that we can do.
Oh my God, that you're a
for
person?
ourselves. Right.
But see, there's a time for everything, right? There's a time to be a warrior. When someone, when you're up against the wall, and your only option is to fight. Yeah, I don't believe in always turning the other cheek. I don't think that's appropriate in all situations. I think it works in a lot of situations, and
I think it works in a lot of situations where we don't really want it to.
And that's the thing. Exactly.
I mean?
I think you and I actually agree on this more than you think we do.
Yeah.
Because we can always take an experience and grow from it, and react a little better. That's always going to be our journey. Always. There's never really an end to that, or a destination. It's something we always get better at.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much the perfect segue into the next segment. So we're going to take a break here real quick, and when we come back, we're going to get real personal.
Uh-oh.
So we're going to leave the legal arguments and wrangling aside, and we're going to discuss why marriage is important to us, specifically myself, Jonathan, and Daniel, and a few of my friends as queer folks, and why this issue matters to us, and you might even be a little surprised by what you hear. Stick around. More Gaytheist Manifesto coming up.
Founded in 2006 for the purpose of realizing one man's vision, the Richard Dawkins Foundation works to remove the corrosive influence of religion in education and in the public square, while also working to eliminate the stigma that surrounds atheism, secularism, and non-belief. People should be free to express their non-belief without risking their jobs, businesses, relationships, and community standing, because continuing to allow attacks on science, climate change, medical advancements, and sex education has real-world consequences for billions of human beings beyond the discomfort of a few. Freedom for scientists, health and climate researchers, and ordinary human beings to work in understanding our universe and subscribing to an evidence-based world without the interference of religion is paramount if we are going to have a healthy future or else succumb to the darkness of ignorance and despair. The Richard Dawkins Foundation is committed to changing our culture, and you can help by joining, donating to, or volunteering for the Richard Dawkins Foundation at richarddawkins.net/donate, or you can sign up for their newsletter at richarddawkins.net/subscribe. Reason, Science, Progress. The Richard Dawkins Foundation at richarddawkins.net.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto Marriage Extravaganza. In this segment, we want to talk about more the personal side of the issue. So we hear arguments all the time about the legality of marriage equality, why it really and truly is an equal rights issue and a civil rights issue. And these arguments are important. That's why we covered them in the last segment. But at the end of the day, I want this show to be about people and people's stories, their loves, their triumphs, struggles, victories, heartbreaks, so on and so on. So for this one, I've written about a bit about my thoughts on the issue, as have Jonathan and Daniel. See, for me, marriage isn't even really the thing. The institution of marriage isn't something I'm 100% sure that I want for myself, personally. For me, the issue is one of simply being recognized as equals in society. As we've talked about in the show before, this isn't trivial. It's not the whining, like, I want everyone to love me and agree with me thing that so many conservatives pointed out to be. Human beings are social creatures. And as Daniel said in an early episode, we are literally wired to care what our communities, societies, and cultures think of us. And I'm not ashamed to say that I care very much about what my society thinks of me. I don't care if necessarily if everyone is, super stoked on activism when it comes to trans rights and social justice and all of that. I mean, I care. I obviously care, or I wouldn't do stuff like this show. What I'm trying to say is I want everyone, at the very least, to agree that I deserve the same treatment and respect under the law and in society as them. As an atheist, I still believe strongly in a Christian's right to worship, as long as they're not pushing it in our government and our schools. And I know that's not a perfect or even a really good comparison, and I'm not sure a perfect comparison exists. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you don't necessarily have to agree with the things that people do to acknowledge their right to do them. In a society that claims to care about freedom, what more basic right can someone have than to enter into an agreement with a person they love to share their lives together and have that be recognized as valid by broader society? I've always said the people who don't realize the value that sort of societal acceptance has are the ones who typically don't have to worry about not getting it. So if you think I'm being superficial or I'm being too sensitive, maybe turn that inward for a minute and try to imagine what it would be like if the way you loved your partner was being decried by some of your own elected officials as the greatest threat ever to our society. Frankly, I think if you think you wouldn't be bothered by that, you're either lying to yourself or you're so far removed from what it's like to be a member of a marginalized group that you can't even see it. Either way, I would encourage you to pay attention to the stories of folks like us so you can understand what it means to us as human beings. Daniel, what do you got?
All right. I've gone back and forth over the years on how I feel about marriage. Where I'm at now is you can't deny marriage has legal benefits and cultural benefits that are pretty important. And it's something that I'd like to think that I could someday have for myself. and the man that I love. I would like to see the institution of marriage change in some ways. I think the current paradigm we have is flawed in some ways, because it's basically a legal contract that has no natural expiration. And that seems ill-suited to me to how human relationships actually work. I would like to see marriage contracts have a natural expiration date, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, several years, and those contracts that they can be renewed, or they can be let to naturally dissolve. And I think this is more in line with fashioning marriage after how human relationships actually work, rather than trying to fit human relationships into the institution of marriage, which to me seems illogical. So if marriage can be allowed to naturally dissolve, if that's the course that a relationship takes, they're still getting all the legal rights and the benefits that come with marriage as they're needed. But if the relationship dissolves, or if the couple decides that they don't want to continue together, there's no need to bring in a lawyer and litigation and all the stigma and time and resources and money that come with getting a divorce. Because I think we look at human relationships in American culture, at least, as being unsuccessful if they don't last forever. And that's simply not true. Sometimes the course of a relationship just is a few years or some finite amount of time. I think we're being dishonest with ourselves by saying that relationships or true love are supposed to last forever, because that's just not what it looks like in throughout our history. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that. I'm an advocate for marriage. I'm an advocate for marriage equality. I'd like it to look different, but in the meantime, I think it's something that I'd like to have for myself someday. I'd like to get married. It's a cultural thing that, I'm not going to lie, it's meaningful to me, and I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think the idea of equality versus equity is something that's worth exploring. Being treated equally by an unfair and unjust system is not necessarily something to strive for. Is an argument that I've heard, and I think there's validity to that, and I sort of hear that in what you're saying. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Jonathan, what do you got?
Well, I guess out of the three of us, I'm the more traditionalist when it comes to this. But I would like to start off saying that until recently, I never actually felt like I wanted to get married. I've never had a relationship longer than about 2 years, and I've never lived with a boyfriend. Although before I came out, I was briefly engaged to a woman, and that might be part of it. I realized what a huge commitment I might have gotten myself into with the wrong person when I was 20, and I think it made me a little bit more cautious. That said, I think when you find the right person, you just know, and that's how I feel with my current boyfriend. I'd really be happy to spend the rest of my life with him. So I guess some people might ask, why do you need to get married? Why can't you just live together and be happy? Well, to me, marriage is a lot of things. It's a symbol, first off, of the commitment. Let me say that again. First of all, it's a symbol of commitment. Maybe before I was frightened of committing because I hadn't met someone who completely and utterly stole my heart. But by getting married, I feel like you show yourself and the rest of the world that you really want to be in it for the long haul. I'm turning 35 soon, and maybe when I was younger, I didn't have the maturity or wisdom to settle down. But now that's all I really want. A little house with a yard and a couple kids and a cat and a dog. And my boyfriend wants a ferret, but that's a discussion for another day. And, of course, I want my man at my side. And honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm weird enough already. I'm gay, I'm liberal, I'm an atheist, I'm a nerd, and I live in the reddest part of a red state where, hunting and outdoor activities are the biggest thing around. So sometimes I just want to be average. So to me, getting married says, hey, I'm not so different. And while the legal ramifications are important to me, I think they go hand in hand. Why do I want to be able to make legal or medical decisions for my hopefully future husband? Well, it's because I love him and want what's best for him. For me, marriage is an outward expression of an inward feeling. I feel like it's about saying I love you without even speaking a word.
Yeah, see, and that's okay. Like, you know, if you want a more traditional style marriage, like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, as long as you're doing it because you want it and not because that's just like what you're supposed to do, like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You want to have the white picket fence in the yard and you can fight over having ferrets and dogs and like that's all cool, you know? Like,
you know, there's something to be said for just participating in culture, participating in things that culture celebrates. We don't have to be countercultural on every level. It's okay. It's okay to be. It's okay to sometimes see something that's a cultural touchstone and say, "Hey, I want that." That's fine.
Well, right, and I mean, there are so many girly stereotypes that I fit right into, and I mean, sometimes it makes me feel like a bad feminist. You know what I mean? But it's okay because it's what I really like. It's not because it's what society tells me what to do. It's just that what I want to do and what society says happens to line up sometimes.
Yes. I hate that more than anything when people tell me I'm doing it because society says to. Maybe I just like what society likes.
and I think that's okay. Yeah. Like, what is wrong with that?
I think it's about examining whether you have the power in that, whether that's empowering you, or whether you're sort of a victim of the system. And I think that if you feel empowered by it and it's making you happy, then cool.
Absolutely. And so not too long before we started recording, I put a post on Facebook and I asked for some of my queer friends why marriage matters to them. And I got some pretty good response. So I'm just going to read off. I've got permission for first names, so this is what I'm going to say. And I have one anonymous entry that I'm going to throw in too. So Fiona says, marriage equality matters because as a bisexual, gender fluid person, I could have met and fallen in love with a woman and I wouldn't be able to marry her. I happened to marry a genderqueer male. I was lucky, but not everyone is, and quite frankly, that's a shitty thing. Why should genitals decide who gets to marry who? As long as you're consenting adults, your love should matter as much as mine does.
Yes.
Jenna says, marriage equality matters because my life partner has a serious illness and we need our rights. I'm not just some random person to be shut out when she needs me to hold her hand the most. Marlis says, I've worked hard to cultivate the fantastic relationship I share with my partner. It's a daily struggle to be the better person she's helped me become and excel beyond that to celebrate the influence she's had on my life. We own a home, 2 cars, and co-parent a slew of fur babies, and hopefully soon a baby together. We put each other through school, have suffered heartbreak and loss together, and have celebrated every opportunity available over the last 8 years. Yet in the eyes of our state, we have less rights to be married than 2 opposite-sex people who just met. Equality matters because my hard-won, beautiful fairy tale effing ending is not less than. And she adds, also, because doing our taxes twice in order to file with the state of Ohio can suck the big one.
Oh, very well said.
Let's see. And there's actually a discussion here that I think is pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and read what was said. So Fiona responded to Jenna, said, if my husband is seriously ill, I'm allowed to comfort him. Nobody has the legal right to stop me. But if he was a woman, trans or intersexed, I would not be guaranteed that right. Why should I be afforded more rights than Jenna? Jenna says, yes, now when I call the hospital or demand certain things be done, I identify myself as her advocate, and she's put my name and number as a contact, but what of the day that doesn't work? She's also deaf, and my ability to translate speech to sign or say it back in a way she can lip read or type for gives me some rights, but seriously. And yes, my state allows it now, as of recently, but we've yet to be able to do it. She's been too ill. No couple going through this should ever have to stop and wonder if they'll be denied access to one another or make important choices they know the other wants.
Yeah, that's a great point, because a lot of folks may not realize that a family member can intervene and completely shut someone's partner out if they don't have legal rights, and that happens.
What is the name of that movie?
Can you be more specific? Was it the movie with the guy who did that thing?
Muppets Take Manhattan, right?
It's literally the situation. It's literally the situation you just described. It's a gay couple. One of them dies unexpectedly, and his boyfriend is just completely shut out of the process because the family doesn't accept them as a couple.
Was it a
bridegroom?
Okay. That happens. It happens. It's happened to guys that I know, and it's really sad and it sucks.
Yes. Okay, so there's this movie Bridegroom where that actually happens, and it's a true story. There's a gay couple. One of them dies unexpectedly, horrible accident, and this guy is completely shut out of his partner's funeral and the things that they shared together and the life that they shared together because they didn't have the legal right and because his parents didn't accept them. So, they're really horrifying, terrible consequences.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. That situation is stressful enough as it is. Imagine having the extra burden laid on top of you of not being able to see your partner and of being shut out by the family.
And I highly recommend the movie. I mean, it is heartbreaking. You will cry if you have a heart at the end of this movie, but it's worth the watch to really drive the importance of this thing home. And finally, I have a friend who asked to stay anonymous. Why equality in marriage matters. I'm bisexual. I've always been more attracted to the opposite sex, but same sex is not and has not been excluded. I've been through many relationships. I was so demoralized with my bad luck in relationships that when I started the relationship with the woman that is now my wife, I vowed to myself that if this relationship did not work out, I was going to actively pursue men to see if that fixed the issue. Fortunately and thankfully, the relationship with my wife is working out wonderfully. But what if? What if it hadn't? What if I'd started pursuing men and found Mr. Right? I would have found the fix that eluded me for 40 years. And that fix would have been limited by an arbitrary rule. Love is love. Consenting adults should not have any restrictions on their happiness.
Very well said.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that.
That's a great story.
Yeah. So
wow.
So we're gonna break after that because there's really nothing else we can say for that. We're gonna be right back with Be a Better Ally. More Gaytheist Manifesto coming up.
I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and I believe that reaching out for help is the bravest thing a person can do. If you are struggling and need support, call the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386. It's free and confidential, and trained counsellors are there to listen 24/7 without judgment. To learn more about the Trevor Project's life-saving work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning young people, go to thetrevorproject.org.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. This week's Be a Better Ally segment, as it has been in the past, is inspired by something that happened to me this past week. So let me ask everyone a question. Jonathan and Daniel, feel free to answer. When was the last time you were asked by a stranger about the state of your genitalia?
I don't even know.
I'm guessing the answer is rarely, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Not for trans people, though.
Yeah, I don't.
For some reason, strangers often seem to think that my mention of being transgender entitles them to know whether I've been quote-unquote fully converted. And yes, that's a term someone actually used when asking me that once.
Wow.
The short, sweet, and simple of it is that the arrangement of my genitalia is the business of exactly two groups of people. Those I plan to have sex with, and those who provide my medical care. And I know that I personally open myself up to this a little more by being publicly out and speaking on the topic often. And I've said plenty of times on this show and in other interviews, things about pursuing that. So, I haven't had the conversion, quote unquote.
Oh man.
But that's my choice to talk about. And it's my choice to talk about it with who I want to talk about. And, I'm personally not super shy about discussing that kind of thing and my experience in the right context. The right context being someone I know asking me a genuine question because they want to better understand my experience as a trans person. I'm not an object of curiosity. I don't owe you an answer to any question you ask, especially not ones that are asked simply so the questioner can be shocked by the answer. So please err on the side of just not asking trans people about their surgical experiences. If it's relevant to our relationship, you'll probably hear about it eventually. If not, you may want to examine the reason you care so much in the first place.
That seems pretty reasonable.
You would think.
Yeah.
You would think.
I don't know if Daniel, if you have, but I've gotten odd questions about sex from straight people, but I've never been asked about the arrangement.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I bet. Oh, I bet.
I don't mind answering those. I don't mind answering those questions usually, and as long as, like Kelly said, they're not asking just to be shocked by the answer.
Yeah.
Well, right, because a lot of times, when a stranger's asking me, obviously I don't know. Like if I've just been talking to you for like 2 minutes, and the topic comes up, I'm like, yeah, like I'm an LGBT activist, I'm an atheist activist, I'm out and proud, I'm bi, I'm trans. Like, oh, okay. Have you had the surgery? Like, we're 30 seconds into the conversation at this point.
Right.
That's not your business, dude.
And you wouldn't ask a cis person that, like anything about that.
Right.
How's your vagina doing today?
Right. Or one of my favorite lines ever on the subject was, I think I was on that show Waiting for Wrath. Some new friends of ours who tweeted out a question about terminology, and I happened to be not doing anything when they responded. So we ended up Skyping and we ended up talking, and and I think I was setting up a hypothetical scenario, and I was like, "Sup with your vagina, bro."
That was Waiting for Wrath is a great show. I really enjoyed that.
I love those guys.
That was cool. It was a great show. Check them out.
So, yeah, and it's, we make it funny because it's, honestly, like it is kind of funny in some ways, but in a lot of ways it's not. There's this sense of entitlement that people have. And moving outside of this to even just being queer in general, right? When somebody finds out that there's something different about you, sometimes you become an object of curiosity more than you're a person to them. And this has even happened to me over being atheist.
Sure.
Somebody asked me, "You're an atheist, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And so, like, full on all the way atheist.
Have you been fully converted?
Have you had the surgery?
Have you had God excised from your soul? Like all the way?
Yeah.
And
are you just agnostic?
and I think,
are you still agnostic?
Like where do you get your morals?
Yeah. Oh my God.
I haven't had that surgery yet.
Oh.
How can you not believe in creation? It's so up.
Yeah, but it speaks to this sort of entitlement mentality that some people have towards people who are different. And, this idea that, even people who fancy themselves as allies and who fancy themselves as progressive and open-minded, sometimes their allyship becomes more about them than it is being an ally. And I think a lot of times that gets borne out in these conversations. So bottom line is, don't ask a stranger about their genitals. Just don't, please.
And I gotta say, Callie, I've learned a lot from you. I didn't really know.
Me too.
Any trans people before I met you, Kelly, and I'm sure I asked a few inappropriate questions at the beginning, so I apologize if that was the case.
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't want to be like, there was the line I'm not obligated to answer any question you have just because you have it. And that's true. And, that may come off a little more harshly than I mean it to. Generally, when I'm having these conversations with people like you guys, or people like, in this amazing atheist podcaster community that we're now a part of, and that is so awesomely just embraced us as one of them. And, when those folks ask questions, I know it's coming from the right place.
Right.
So even if it's a little inappropriate, which honestly I can't really think of a time that it has been.
Okay.
But even if it was, all I would really have to say is like, I'm not really so comfortable talking about that. And I have every confidence that it'll be, oh yeah, sorry, no big deal. Let's move on. And I think that's kind of the point at the end of the day.
Yeah, and these Be a Better Ally segments, they're kind of all about, we'll save you the embarrassment of being in that situation.
Right, exactly.
just follow these simple guidelines and we're cool.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to put out
a like a little manual.
Yep. And that's gonna do it. That's gonna do it for another episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to thank my lovely co-hosts Jonathan and Daniel.
Yay!
My pleasure.
And you can get in touch with us online at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali.
And I, Jonathan, am on Twitter at NerdCub. That's NERDKUB.
And I, Daniel, am on Twitter at Daniel Wolfsong.
If you want to support the show, please go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Don't know why I haven't said that before, but that really helps out with rankings. It helps more people hear the show. It helps us reach more people. So in podcasting, that still matters, believe it or not. So if you feel like we deserve it, please go do that. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're hurting, if you're lost, if you feel like no one understands and no one cares, you need to know there's a community out here who loves you and cares for you and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.